doing this very important and timely briefing. And I also want to thank our distinguished panelists. I will introduce now our benevolent moderator, Lantos. She's an Africa specialist at CRS, the Congressional Research Service, and she will be moderating today. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission for hosting this very important briefing. I think it is difficult sometimes to keep our eye on the ball, and Congress has been very engaged over the last month and more with developments in northern Nigeria, but I think this is a really timely opportunity to highlight some of the recent developments in Sudan, which has been a country of perennial interest for several decades now for Congress. And I think we've got some fantastic speakers here today to talk about some of the issues. I'm going to just very briefly introduce them and turn it over to them so they can share their insights with you. To my left, we have Omar Ismail with the Enough Project. Omar is a Darfuri from Sudan and has been in the United States for quite a long time now. And he is just finishing up a fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government up at Harvard. And he has been engaged in the peace talks with the SPLM North and the SRF and the government of Sudan in Addis Ababa recently for the last year or so. And really has some great insights I think he can share with us, not only on the conflict in Darfur and southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, but also on developments in Khartoum and that affect Sudan as well. Ryan Boyette is with Nuba Reports. This is a fantastic indigenous reporting mechanism out of southern Kordofan, more popularly sort of the Nuba Mountains area. And he's going to talk a bit today about the conflict in southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, which has been ongoing since 2011 and dates back before that to the north-south, as we like to refer to it, civil war. Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile were two areas caught in the middle where you had large groups of people who fought alongside the SPLM, which was the Southern Rebel Movement, during the Civil War. With separation, they fell on the north side of the line and have been caught up in a conflict that's been deadly and displaced over 1 million people for the last couple of years. And then finally, and not least, Ambassador Kristen Lyman, former U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan, who I think will be able to share some insights with you on U.S. policy towards the country and the challenges and engaging with the government of Sudan on these very difficult issues and looking forward at what Congress and the administration might do in terms of engaging on these human rights issues. And with this, I'm going to start maybe with Ryan.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really happy about the turnout today. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm gonna jump right into it. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Blue Nile, where the conflict has also been taking place. Where my team is working is primarily South Kordofan, but we do have some knowledge in Blue Nile, but not nearly as much as South Kordofan. The current refugee numbers in Blue Nile are 120,000 from Blue Nile that have gone to South Sudan and Ethiopia. The fighting has not changed too much over the past year. The front lines has not changed too much, but there has been a very big increase in bombardment. For the work of my team, we do not count bombs that we cannot confirm, which means our team has either witnessed them or gone to the site of the bombing and taken pictures with GPS tag coordinates. But we do have people tallying the bombings there, which is an estimate of 200 bombs were dropped the first 3 months of this year, which that's a very high number for that region, especially because the rebels in the area are confined to a much smaller space than in South Kordofan. So the bombardment has been very heavy in the region of Blue Nile since the beginning of the year. So I want to now look to South Kordofan, which I can tell you about trends that we're seeing. I've been in Sudan over the past 11 years, and since the beginning of this war. I came from there 2 months ago, and I'll be returning there. So we know exactly what's happening in South Kordofan. Our team is located in all parts of South Kordofan, and they only report what they see, and we have evidence to back up what we're saying. So I want to talk about trends that we're seeing. The first trend that we're seeing is tactical changes. Last year, we saw a lot of tactical changes in the Sudan Army's ability to to bomb areas. They started purchasing a lot more Sequoia jets. They still use the Antonov bombers, but they're using a lot more Sequoias, which are much more accurate at bombing. They have also used new type of bombs, which are parachute bombs. The parachute bombs are much more accurate than the regular bombs that they were using. They're the same bombs that are currently being used in Syria. We also saw the use of snipers by the Sudan government and the use of demolition teams. These were all taking place last year. Now, as this year started, over the past just 3 to 4 months, we have seen huge differences in the tactics and strategies used by the new force called the Rapid Response Force. These new tactics are using artillery, which is much more accurate than they have used in the past. So when they bombard an area, they will hit that area very hard as their vehicles move in at the same time. Traditionally, the Sudan army has moved in very slowly with a very large force, come into an area, set up defenses. But now the difference that we're seeing is the cars will move in, or the artillery will bombard an area, then the cars will move in, the mounted trucks will move in very fast and overwhelm the SRF, and they will back up. Normally, the Sudan government will then hold that area, but we are not seeing that now. Now they will take an area and move very fast. Sometimes it won't even be a whole day. Sometimes in the same day they'll move 2 or 3 different times, and then the next morning they move again. That has been the Rapid Response Force's use of their new tactics. As a result of this, we have seen the most displacement in the past 4 months since 2012. There was more displacement when the war first started, but since the beginning of 2012, we haven't seen this much displacement. Areas of Rashad County and Dalami County have seen a total of 90,000 people displaced as a result of this Rapid Response Force. A little bit of background: when the Rapid Response Force attacked a region late last year, they went back to El Obeid, which is in the government-controlled areas, waiting to get paid. They act more as like a militia. They were paid off $3 million. When they received that $3 million, they returned to Darfur, and in Darfur, they displaced an additional 18,000 people in Darfur. So wherever this force is moving, they're very devastating to the region, as well as their new tactics. So the areas that we're seeing displacement, there's a part in the southern part of South Kordofan. We saw a place called Toroje. We saw around 2,000 displaced there late last year. We see around 85 to 90,000 in Rashad and Dalami counties, and the 18,000 in Darfur just from this force. Something else that is very recent. Some of you may have seen the report of the bombing of the hospital in South Kordofan. There was a bombing at the hospital in Gidel, which is the only hospital, the only place that there is a certified surgeon, international surgeon, an American surgeon. The hospital was bombed 2 times. A drone flew over 2 days in a row, right over the hospital. The very next day, the hospital was bombed. The next day after that, the hospital was bombed again on 2 separate occasions. There's nothing else in the area. We didn't report this, but we also believe another hospital run by a German NGO was also bombed. But we can't confirm that exactly because it was in the mountains and it didn't hit quite as close. But it was with an Antonov, but we believe that it was also a target. There was also a hospital bombed in Darfur last week, which was reported on Radio Dabanga and Radio Tamazic. So a lot of hospitals are being bombed. This is also a new strategy. We haven't seen this since the beginning of the war until now. This is creating a lot of food insecurity. Because of the fighting in South Sudan, there were many merchants from the South Kordofan region that had trucks, tractors, lorries that would bring supplies back from areas like Bentu. They were merchants, and they would trade and barter different items, and they would be they were the source of bringing a lot of things that you find in the market. Now those markets have stopped because of the fighting in South Sudan. There's no access to those goods, and these were supplementing people's diets. So we have a very bad situation in Rashad County where the most people were displaced. In that region, the people didn't have the coping mechanisms of people who experienced the last war. The coping mechanisms I'm talking about is when a force comes in and burns your village, when the government forces have came in the past, people have learned, grab some seeds, grab some food, and run with it. Well, now, because of the new tactics of the Rapid Response Force, they move very fast, and because the people in some of these areas never experienced the war in the past, they're just running away. They also are not used to digging bomb shelters when the planes bomb. So when the planes bomb in those areas, we're hearing of many more dead when the bombs fall than some of the areas that experienced the war in the past North-South war. So the areas of Rashad and Abbasiyah are going to be in a very, very desperate situation this year. People do not have seeds to eat. They don't even have seeds to plant. So I want to talk a little bit about South Sudan. We have some, I won't say evidence, but there are some clues to suggest that Sudan is getting involved in the South Sudan conflict. Just yesterday, I received a photo of soldiers that were killed in battle from the Sudan government, and many of them are South Sudanese. And this fighting was well in South Kordofan, hundreds of kilometers from the north-south border, and they were South Sudanese fighting against the rebels in Sudan. Okay, I know there's a lot of South and Sudan and South Kordofan, but let me explain that a little bit better. So, soldiers from South Sudan were fighting on the side of the Sudan government against the rebels inside Sudan. So there's some cross-border soldier thing going on here. I got that picture yesterday from, there was a town taken by the Sudan government called Abri about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then last week, they moved from Abri more into the SPLA North-controlled areas, and SRF was able to push them back. Then my team came up behind them and found these South Sudanese soldiers, several of them dead on the ground. At the same time, there was many boxes of ammo with Farsi writing on them. So boxes of ammo from Iran on the ground. That's mainly what I want to talk about today. I'll be happy to answer any questions later, and I've taken a lot of time, so thank you.
Well, I think we perhaps have a distinguished guest with us, the chairman of the Lantos Human Rights Commission, Congressman Frank Wolf. Would you like to say a few words?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Well, then we will turn it over to Omar to speak about Darfur and everything else.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the committee for having me. It's a return for me back to brief here and testify before the committee before. Thank you. And it's great to be back and great to see you all. I'm honored to be here with Ryan, somebody that I talked to, and work with him in the issues of the Nuba Mountains, but this is the first time I see him in person. And of course, with Ambassador Lyman, somebody that I worked with in the issues of Sudan when he was the special envoy, still involved, one of the most knowledgeable people about our country, or countries, should I say. And I'm always honored to be with you. And thank you both for your great work for the people of Sudan. I'll speak about the violence in Darfur, the renewed violence in Darfur. And then when there is a chance, I will talk about a few kind of like policy recommendations in terms of what this institution can do towards the general country, the U.S. policy towards Sudan. This violence is not new. The same violence in Darfur through the years. Now it is the 11th year. We kept on saying this genocide continues by attrition. It is taking different shapes. The UN bought the idea that, there is no, the violence is a little bit less, and now Darfur is all nice and rosy. And even the director of, or the chairman, I don't know exactly the position, but maybe it's the director of UNAMID, who was leaving, Mr. Adada, was saying, I left Darfur, and it is now safe. Came in Mr. Ibrahim Gambari, to lead UNAMID, and he was saying there was no violence now in Darfur. And then before he finished that sentence, we've seen the new rise in this violence from 2011, kept on going through 2012, 2013, the end of the year, we have seen something completely different, and now in 2014, if we look at this time, from the time that they were saying the violence is down, until today in 2014, we have over 500,000 people displaced. 500,000 people displaced, many other thousands were killed. So, what happened is, the government of Sudan never changed their tactics of a security resolution to the situation of Darfur. Not only Darfur, but spreading the violence across the country. They never abandoned their tactics of a military solution to whatever problem that they see in the country. Now, it is not only just in the periphery. We will see that they move the violence even to the capital, Khartoum. And as we speak, right now, the rapid support forces are cordoning off the tri-capital of Khartoum. As we speak, today, at this moment. And the police is deployed within the tri-state of the capital, Khartoum. So these guys are outside Khartoum. It is layers of security. But we will talk about that later. Where these rapid response forces came from, it is nothing but the old wine in new bottles. The same January, the same, nothing changed. The only thing that happened is that at this time, they are bringing in the most violent elements within the Janjaweed to do their dirty bidding. They recruited somebody called Hamati, a young man. He was a Janjaweed in 2003, 2004. He was interviewed by the Australian TV. He was saying, he was bragging about receiving orders from Bashir himself to do what they were doing in Darfur. So now, the main leader, the guy that most of the people know in Darfur, Musa Hilal, is having issues with the government. He did not leave what he was doing. He is still a Janjaweed leader. But he, for some time, brought to Khartoum, sat in the palace. They started meeting international media and diplomats in the Khartoum Hilton. So he thought that he's some leader in Khartoum. And then that is the way the government of Sudan does. Bringing in these people, the patronage system, paying them money, giving them positions, and then put them on the side. And so Musa Hilal was on the side. He could not stay away from the limelight. So he went back to Darfur, not because he wants to join the other rebellion, but to force Khartoum to consider him as still a relevant leader and his people are relevant for what Khartoum wants to do. So because of that misunderstanding with Hilal, they recruited him. They gave him 6,000 serial numbers from the army. These are the way the army works in Sudan. These are like the IDs of the soldiers. They give them what they call the NIMR numbers. They give them, these are serial numbers within the army rank and file. He gave them 6,000, recruited 6,000 young men, brought them to Khartoum. They were divided between the NISS, the National Intelligence and Security Service, and SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces. And they were trained in Wadi Saidna, the main air base north of Umdurman, and they were trained in Al-Jaili in Khartoum North, the town of Khartoum North. North of that town, there is a small town called Al-Jaili. They were trained there, half and half. The reason that they are so effective comes down to three things. First, they are now better trained. It's a fair way with the Janjaweed that are characterized as the people who are nimble, got certain training, got rapid support from the government of Sudan in the neighborhood of 700 brand new Toyota vehicles, equipment that they have not seen before, because before they were the devil on horseback. Everybody knows that. Now, no more. They are new forces, well trained, with uniform, government insignia, ID cards. They are part of both NISS and SAF, and so they are completely different. They have brandished new supplies from the government, and significantly, their attacks were reinforced by aerial bombardment. That is, we all know, like Ryan described right now. Secondly, they are fully integrated in the Sudanese military command and control. Before, these were the Janjaweed. This is the Sudanese army. They do the support for the Janjaweed. But now, the Janjaweed are fully integrated within the rank and file command and control. In fact, the government officials brag that the RSF offenses are moral victories for the army. And they have somebody at the rank of general, Abbas Abdelaziz, who is a general proper in the Sudanese army, who is working with him in joint command of the rapid response forces. So before, we have seen that the government of Sudan was trying to say, the Janjaweed are militia. These are not part of us. We have nothing to do with the Janjaweed. No. Now, the Janjaweed are part and parcel of the government, and they had the audacity to have their own Facebook. Now, you can go there, and there is a Facebook page for the Rapid Response Forces. And the government is bragging about them, and they are saying, for example, Mr. Al-Mahdi was now detained because he criticized these guys and he called them killers. And finally, unlike the other waves of fighting that we have seen before that focus on Darfur, now we see that there are this multi-theater of operation. The Janjaweed are no longer just working in Darfur. They are, as Ryan described, they were in Kurdistan, and I don't have to repeat that, but they are now taking this fight from Darfur through Kurdistan. Not only that, they were used in putting down the uprising of September 15th in Khartoum of last year. 500 of these elements were taken. They did not even finish their training yet. 5 in every truck. They had 100 trucks, and they had a driver and a navigator in the cabin of the truck. These are specifically NISS personnel. The drivers, so that they receive the instructions directly from the NISS, and the navigator, so that they avoid what happened to Mohammed Nursad before. Those who are following Sudan, they know in 1976, or even recently Khalil Ibrahim when he went to Khartoum. The reason that Khalil was defeated really quickly, because none of these fighters or attackers who came to Khartoum know the geography of the city. So to avoid that, because these guys were brought from all over, from Darfur, from Mali, from Niger, from Chad, from elsewhere. They don't know Khartoum. They don't know the geography of that place, so they have to give them people who will show them where to go. And they overnight killed about 250. So, and some of these people were the wrong people, because some of the NCP guys were at the Bashir's case, and his guy, and Muhammad Atta, who is the director of the NISS, and they're saying, we did not bring these people to kill our sons and daughters. They are supposed to kill other people. That is why they pulled them out, they sent them overnight to Kurdistan, and from there to Darfur, back again to Khartoum today. They are cordoning off Khartoum as we speak today, and they deployed the reinforced police inside the cities, but they are outside making one more layer of security to control Khartoum. I have a couple of more minutes, but I will spare that for the Q&A, and we'll talk about the recommendations that we have for the experiments. Thank you.
Ambassador Lyman.
Thank you very much. Thanks for putting this on, for having Omar and Ryan here. in particular Congressman Wolf, who has been, I think, the strongest voice in Congress for decades on issues of human rights, humanitarianism. We're going to miss you very much, Congressman, when you leave. But I hope your voice remains very vibrant and strong on these issues. You know, in years of struggling on how to get peace in Sudan, not only the peace agreement that led to South Sudan's independence, but areas of southern Khartoum, Blue Nile, and Darfur, more and more the consensus is that the efforts to try and get peace in particular regions, whether the two areas that Brian talked about in Darfur, just simply doesn't work because the fundamental problem is the way Sudan is governed from the center. And it's impossible to get, if you will, a democratic solution in Darfur with a government at the center that doesn't operate that way. So past efforts, as serious as they may have been, the Darfur Peace Agreement, the DDPD, the Doha effort, etc., have not changed that situation, and I think that's true now in negotiations over Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile. But that gets you to the question of how change comes to Khartoum, how change comes to that government, and what could bring that about. On the surface of it, you would say, look, all the pressures are such that people in Khartoum have to know that they can't keep going on this way. They've lost a lot of income from oil. They've made it up in some other ways. They're still under sanctions. They still haven't had debt relief. They're being challenged in Darfur. They have, in spite of their new tactics, have really dislodged the SPLM in the two areas. That this is not a winning combination over time. And there are many in Khartoum who will say, yes, that's true. This isn't going to get us anywhere. We have to change. But you have another mentality operating in Khartoum, which is, no, we can't allow ourselves to be forced militarily. We can beat down these rebellions in various ways. And one thing about this new rapid support force, the response force that both Ryan and Omar have talked about is that I think it's more under this control than military control, which represents the intelligence service strengthening its own role in military security. They've always had their own security forces, but now they're playing a bigger role. And what they've done is, if you can call it that, professionalize their relationship with some of the Arab militias in Darfur. But this also comes at a time after a period in which they were losing control of those militias. They were fighting against each other over gold mines. They were fighting against the government. There was a quasi-anarchy going on, and part of this is a response by the government to regain control in Darfur over their own allies, the Janjaweed, as well as to fight what had been the increased efforts of the rebel groups, the main ones, JAM, etc. So how does one move forward in these circumstances? It's very difficult indeed. There have been negotiations recently between the government and the SPLM North, the group that's fighting in southern Kordofan and Blue Nile. For a long time, those negotiations have been hung up over two major issues. Can you just get a cessation of hostilities and humanitarian assistance and then move on to political discussions? Or do you have to get an agreement, as the government was demanding, for disarmament of the rebels and all the rest before you move on? There's been some small movement in those talks and a recognition by the government in those talks that you can't solve the problems there without at least giving the SPLM North eventually a voice, not the only voice, in a national dialogue and transformation. At least the principle is back on the table, but there's a lot of hard negotiations to go. But it's also complicated because Darfur is a harder place to negotiate. There are many, many more actors in Darfur, not only the rebel groups that people know about, Manawi, Abdul Wahid, Jem, etc., but you have now a number of different militias, etc., operating, and the alliance, the so-called Sudan Revolutionary Force, is not necessarily able to speak for all of Darfur, and it complicates negotiations in other ways that we don't have to go into. So the question is, how does one get at this problem? Part of the problem for the international community is that we have several overlapping mandates for how to deal with this. We have the African Union High-Level Panel headed by Thabo Mbeki, whose mandate includes, and it's increasingly his focus, the transformation of Sudan. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's one of his charges. You also have the head of UNAMID, who reports both to the African Union and the UN, because it's a joint force, and he has a mandate to try to implement the last peace agreement in Darfur, the so-called DDPD. And then you have a UN envoy for Sudan and South Sudan. And those mandates overlap to some extent, and we need an agreed strategy among all the international actors on how to deal with the government of Sudan, etc. The second is the pressure of the neighbors, now heavily focused on the civil war in South Sudan, which has had a rippling effect and which, has been pointed out, complicates this whole situation in Sudan. But we have to come back more to the principles that the African Union themselves enunciated over a year ago about the need for transformation in the government of Sudan. Now, it's virtually impossible to get more international sanctions on Sudan. Russia and China simply will not go along with them. And the arms embargo, which is an arms embargo on Darfur, which I've never understood, how you can have an arms embargo on part of the country, has never been honored. So our ability to get more international sanctions, whether on gold, whether on our arms embargo, is just not viable. We looked at it dozens of times. So there are other ways you hope to put pressure on it. You've got to bring more Arab pressure on the government. The most active supporter from the Arab community on Sudan is Qatar, which has tried to negotiate this peace process in Darfur. The principles were fine, but it just simply wasn't implemented. And which has provided some, not as much as reported, but some financial support to the government of Khartoum. And finally, you have to really encourage those inside the Khartoum government and around it that this is in the long term a losing proposition, that they've got to find a way out of this way of governing the country, of fighting their own population, not only in the so-called periphery, but as Omar has pointed out, in the capital of Khartoum, and that in the long term, the country cannot survive this way. It can survive a long time. We know that, but it can't survive over a long time. There are people there who understand this. There are people who talk a good game about it, but they're not making the decisions. And hanging over them is the question of what to do about President Bashir. President Bashir is indicted, as you all know, as a war criminal, genocide, etc. And the question is, what do they do about it? How do you move him aside and have a transformation and manage all the politics of that? So transformation in Sudan is going to be difficult. And until it comes, until it happens, until there's a recognition that the present practices cannot be sustained, we're going to have the kind of problems that we've seen here. International support, we can get into it a little bit more, humanitarian aid into some of these areas to counter some of the food problems that have been going on, the protection of as many civilians as you can in Darfur from UNAMID, but also I think we have to think through, this is a discussion we've had recently, about how the United States can do more to promote democratic political movements. We talk a lot about civil society. We don't talk very much about political movements that can rule democratically. And I think this is one of the failures in South Sudan. And the question is whether with SRF, even UMA and DUP and others, we can do more to promote the future of democratic rule through democratic political parties. But that's worthy of another long discussion.
Normally, I would take the prerogative of the chair to ask the first question, but I might turn it over to the members if either of them would like to say a few words or ask any questions.
Well, I guess, I came in a little late, but what congressional action do you recommend? I mean, I know the situation is difficult and dire and complicated and complex, but surely, there have to be things that we can do here to increase the pressure on the government of Sudan, at least make it more isolate governments that welcome Bashir into their countries, and the reaction to the community is muted at best. But I mean, what can we do other than kind of say that it's really complicated and we have to wait it out?
It's a very important question, and I wish I had a simple answer to it. I do think that I would put more effort on encouraging the Africans and the Arab League to take responsibility for this situation. And I think to the extent that Congress can communicate that both to the African Union and to the Arab League, and the seriousness of this, and it's on their doorstep, I think that's an important thing to do. We have our sanctions on them. We don't do debt relief. We don't do a variety of things. I'm not sure how much more can be done in that regard that would matter. But I do think that perhaps more encouragement to the neighborhood and to the potential supporters of Khartoum to get more active. But others may have.
I think there's the bill HR 1692 that I think is yes, so that was definitely brought up by you guys. So you never know about that. Yes. I think if there's a way to pull that out from all the paperwork and give it importance again, maybe amend it a little bit and get it back out on top and have people look at it. I think that has good initiatives. And not only that, but it'll bring attention to other parts of our government to also say, okay, House is doing this, and we need to also step forward on some other possible initiatives that they can do. So I think that is a very positive way forward.
I think calling for the same two points here, I would add that urging the Department of State Office of Global Criminal Justice to support the national effort to ensure transitional justice mechanisms that can work in Sudan, and supporting a senior ambassadorial level deputy to the Department of State's Office of the Special Envoy to work on the issues of Sudan and the issues of South Sudan, because handling this through one office, and we have a special envoy here sitting, I think it is a little bit too much. The support that is supposed to be given to the Office of the Special Envoy is crucial for the engagement with Khartoum. We talked about several other things. One of them is allocating additional resources for the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control to increase capacity of sanctions investigation, because some of the issues in Sudan that are now opened up and many people are challenging the regime and talking about the corruption. If we have more assets allocated to this office and it's helping in kind of tracing some of these things, that will force the regime to make some compromises. Because we know they siphoned $100 billion of the oil money out of the country, and there is very little to show inside the country except for the military hardware and gear that they have. So that money went somewhere. If we can help raise that, that will be a lever that we can use for them to compromise. And I think highlighting some of the gold exports that the government is now, they call the gold our new oil. And this is not easy to do, but if Congress can find ways to support some sort of hard look at that and trace it down and to tell the government of Sudan, we know what you are doing, and this is another way of enhancing these levers that can make the government of Sudan change its behavior.
All right, I'm going to ask the first question up here. A question for you, Ambassador Lantos. You mentioned the challenges that we have in pushing anything more through the Security Council because of Russia and China's reservations. I guess it was just over a month ago now, a former UNABID spokesman came out with a really scathing indictment of the peacekeeping missions' efforts to sort of keep some of the reporting, particularly on the deaths of UN peacekeepers and other attacks on civilians, quiet. Is there more that the UN bodies could be doing in terms of reporting on what's happening in Darfur?
Yeah, we had a lot of problems with UNAMID for a long period of time in terms of their reporting, trying to walk a fine line between reporting honestly and keeping their relationships with the government, on which they're dependent, as any peacekeeping force is. They need the visas to bring people in, they need all that support. But it's meant that some of the reporting has just not gotten the attention it should get. And now, as Omar has pointed out, the violence has stepped up substantially over the last 2 years in Darfur, much greater than before. And so I think UNAMID has to be in a position to report on that more actively. And there are a number of other steps they have to improve. Some of the deploying peacekeepers in UNAMID are not very good. They don't stand their ground. And I think there has to be a number of improvements in that regard. There is a review of UNAMID going on right now, and I think these are some of the issues that have to be pursued.
And is it at all worth considering the United States raising at the Security Council the issue of expanding or creating new missions or investigations in relation to the conflict in southern Sudan and Blue Nile?
I don't think the UN would be, I think it's very hard to get in there to do that. The information we get from people like Ryan and others inside and from the SPLM North itself, I think you could put it on the agenda of the Human Rights Commission. Again, you're going to run into opposition from a lot of groups, but I think putting it on the agenda there is worthwhile.
Yes, I have two questions. The first for Ryan Boyette. You were describing people, SPLM soldiers who've been killed who were with Farsi ammunition, Iranian ammunition. Were these Mashar people who wear SPLM uniforms? Are you talking, or is Juba somehow supporting Khartoum in the Nuba fight? So that's question number one. The second question, you mentioned, Mr. Boyette mentioned 120,000 fleeing from Blue Nile. The figure rule of thumb I used to use, if you're talking 120,000 famished, shocked, traumatized people fleeing across enemy territory, you're talking basically 10%, 12,000 of them will die either on the way or of heartbreak of what happened to their homes and families once they reached the camp, with the 10% figure would be a valid rule of thumb. But anyway, back to the first question.
So the first question about the South Sudanese soldiers inside South Kordofan, deep inside South Kordofan. I can't say if these soldiers were once loyal to Riek or Salva. That's unknown. I have some opinions that I can share, but what we saw is that there were dead South Sudanese soldiers on the ground that were in a battle fighting alongside of the Sudanese government against the SPLM North.
Did you see if they were Nuer or Dinka?
They seem like they are Nuer from the pictures that we have. We also have reports from our guys every time an Antonov bomber would fly over the region. Within a few hours, we always receive a call that this Antonov bombed in this location. These are the details. Over the past the past 2 months, we have seen Antonovs flying over the border into South Sudan. We don't know what they're carrying. We never hear of any bombs. About 3 hours later, they fly directly back. This was not happening prior to a few months ago. And they're Antonov planes. The sound is very well known. We have pictures of the planes flying into South Sudan and flying back. So we don't know where these planes are going, but the fact that it's 3 hours away, there are a lot of airstrips around Bentu. It could possibly show support to rebel groups in South Sudan. So I think that while we look at the issues of South Kordofan, Blue Nile, and Darfur, the war is happening in South Sudan. Now we're getting into my opinion a bit. I think that this is a regional issue. This is not just a South Kordofan issue, a Blue Nile issue, and a Darfur issue, or just a Sudan issue. I think that this is a regional issue. To me, if the NCP is involved in South Sudan issues, that it is doing several things. It is blocking off any access to South Kordofan from South Sudan. It is also isolating the refugees in the middle of both conflicts. It is also is making it so a lot of international eyes cannot come across that border and see what is happening in the region. And as a result, we're seeing the bombing of hospitals and things like that. The way we've seen the movement of the rebel force in South Sudan, it's been moving toward the oil fields. I don't know what's going to happen in a few months. We do know that there was some peace that was signed, a ceasefire that was signed, but if the North is involved, it's not that hard if they have South Sudanese militias that are loyal to them to send them in, attack a village, and move out, and the things spark up again. So I think the NCP has they're trying to put both Salva and Riek in their pocket and trying to manipulate the situation, which also has brought in Uganda, which has also brought in Ethiopia and Eritrea and Chad, and all. It's really destabilizing the whole region. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there are huge accountability issues in South Sudan that need to be addressed. And I am not saying that I think NCP manipulated this entire thing from the beginning. I think they just saw an opportunity, and I think right now that they're taking advantage of it. Now to the other question.
120,000
Okay,
refugees,
so
does that mean 12,000 dead, more or less?
That's really hard to say. Some people are forced to, most of those people have fled into the SRF, SPLM North controlled areas, and there's nowhere for them to get food, especially in those regions. If that does not improve, a lot of people, I believe, will walk across the front lines and go into government-controlled territories, even though they could be subjected to a lot of hardships. But hunger will possibly cause them to go across. Forcing them to a lot of questioning about where SRF positions are and make them very vulnerable. But it's hard to say the actual number, or even guess the actual number.
Hi, Penny Starr with CNS News. I want to ask about Miriam Ibrahim, who is the Christian woman who we're told is in a Sudanese prison with her 20-month-old son. She's 8 months pregnant and has been sentenced to be hung for not renouncing her Christian faith. What can Congress, or you have any comments on that, or members of Congress would? The State Department is not really, the White House released a statement, but the State Department has not responded to questions from my news organization, and I think it's an important topic.
Well, I can't do any more speak for the administration because I'm not there. I did see the White House statement. My guess is the embassy is weighing in Khartoum. I do think that publicity on this matter helps. Sometimes the publicity does, sometimes it doesn't. I think in this case it helps. I think the more attention is focused on it, the better it is for her. So the statements, congressional statements, in other words, seems to me would be very helpful. We've had cases in the past where we've been able to have an effect on individuals who have been in that kind of difficulty, and hopefully we can do that.
I think it is important to note that this is part of the intolerance of this government of any dissent whatsoever. and also its way of curbing freedoms, freedoms of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of religion, what have you. I think the international community should call for the immediate release of this woman, and actually the immediate release of the entire country, the Sudanese people, that they need their freedom. I believe it's an attempt to show the Sudanese that we can go back to our early days of imposing Sharia and cutting off hands and lashing women and hanging people. And it's a method of scaling basically the public that is demanding more freedom and demanding that the government change. So I think the support for this case is not necessarily support for Maryam Yahya alone, but it's support for the whole Sudanese people who are very hungry for freedom.
And there was a letter that went around backyard in New Jersey. Circulated, some of the signed that as well. The government asking for a release, but yeah, I don't know any more than that.
Who was it that sent a letter?
Yeah, a bunch of us signed it. Garrett initiated it.
This may also be an area where the international community could be doing more, Europeans, in particular the French, and the Ethiopian government, given its orthodox. This is perhaps an area where Ethiopians may have some sway with Khartoum. Other questions?
Hello everybody. My English is not very good. I have a long way to come here. I am studying 4 languages, Greek language, Swedish language, Germany. Now I'm here. I have 2 months here. I am Nuba from Northern Sudan. We support all Sudanese, but we have asylum genocide in Northern Sudan. The government of Sudan tried to destroy Nubia in Mahas area and Sikot to build the dams, and they are make a fire in palm trees. The people there, they have only this dates, they bring dates and they food, and the government tried to destroy all Nubia for flooding the Nubian area and destroy historical area in Nubia in northern Sudan. What do you think about this issue in Sudan? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I really appreciate that. Actually, some people on our team are from Mahas area. Just to clarify to everyone, he's talking about Nubia area, which is very far north in Sudan. It's not the Nuba Mountains. There are 2 different locations. And he's talking about a dam that was set up that destroyed the area and caused a lot of the Nubia tribe to move from that region, their traditional area. I would talk about this as looking at the problems of Sudan as a whole. I think that there's every region that has an issue with the central government, and the government has done a very good job of setting walls around each of those issues, and not allowing people to express those issues and also share those issues with other people in the government other people in the country who are having the same issues. Omar talked about the protest inside Khartoum. Our friend talked about the problems in Nubia. We've talked about Darfur, Blue Nile, South Kordofan. These are issues all over the country. And unfortunately, I met with a lot of Sudanese diaspora here and in Egypt. And many times you'll try to meet with people about the issues of Sudan, and you might get just the Nuba community comes, or just the Nubia community comes, or just the Blue Nile or Darfur community comes. And they're very separated. People do not feel united to each other's issues. And I think by breaking down those barriers and building bridges from one issue to another through dialogue, I think people in Nubia can see the problems that people in Khartoum are having. And people in Khartoum can see the problems that people in Nuba are having. Each of them have their separate issues, but there's a lot of core issues that are very similar. And I think first, as as a community, as Sudanese, coming together to discuss these different issues in depth with each other, I think would be a very healthy step in as Sudanese to come together and say these are our major issues with the current situation. I think that would be very helpful. And with that, I think we talk about what we can do. I think in Sudan, the only thing that is going to change the situation in Sudan is Sudanese. There is no U.S. initiative that is going to completely change the situation. It's up to the Sudanese to do it. So anything we can do, obviously this is very general, but anything we can do to support that and support that dialogue, I think is very healthy.
Let me add to that one of the things that is important in the context that Ryan mentions is how the groups who are opposing the government talk about the problem. Because the government says at the early stages of the fighting in southern Kordofan, and to some extent in Darfur, there was talk about the periphery versus the center, the new south, etc. That's terrible rhetoric. That tells the people at the center, these people are coming to get you. So what we spend a lot of time with the SRF is to say, look, your vision ought to be of a united Sudan. You should be talking about what Sudan should look like when everybody is part of the process. And there has been changes in the SRF documents and rhetoric. They've reached out to more groups, to the east, to some extent in the Nubia area, and to some of the parties in Khartoum. Because I think as part of what Ryan is saying, you need to have voices focusing together on what a united Sudan ought to look like, not us versus them, or it's our turn now. Because that only strengthens the government's ability at the center to say, watch out for these guys, they're coming to get you. And that is a kind of encouragement and that we, the U.S. and others, can give to those who are looking for change.
I will ask a question of the panel. We saw a number of sort of uprisings of protest movements last year. What do you see coming this year in terms of protests and the government's reaction? And they're particularly notable, not just in Khartoum, but in a number of the other urban centers in Al Bashir and elsewhere. Where do you see the protest movement going? To what extent has the government sort of tried to control those efforts? And will it rise back up again?
I believe so, because the public, the Sudanese people were not satisfied, and they had seen that the government, with a heavy hand, dealt with the situation that happened in September of last year. Today, in Khartoum, the students of the University of Khartoum this last week, they demonstrated, they closed the university, and in many other places. These demonstrations will continue. But like Ambassador Lyman was saying, the problem is every time you look at it is like isolated islands without these people working together. And that is the perfect divide and rule policy of the government. They did everything they can to fracture these people and not to have them talking to each other. And like you noticed, Ryan, that even in diaspora, when they say something about Darfur, only the people of Darfur come. So the Sudanese need to work together. And if we can help them do that, I think the situation will change. That is one. The second thing is these negotiations that are happening, and everybody is talking about a comprehensive solution. Not necessarily that we have a big table like this that everybody comes in, but we can build it incrementally. We can have different tables in different places, but all these people around these tables should understand the ultimate goal at the end is to have this larger, bigger table where we can address some of those smaller issues or bracket them for a later date, and we can build all this momentum towards that big table at the end. But there is no solution without that comprehensive solution. There is no way without, with this violence that is happening in the country, all the Sudanese stand to lose. Government, opposition, the innocent civilians everywhere, we are not going to go anywhere with this violence. So I think both the government and the opposition, they have to reach a conclusion whereby we have to negotiate the future of this country, and that is the only way out.
I can talk a little bit about the past two larger protests that took place in Khartoum. So the first protest, we have people on the ground since the first protest, the last protest up to now in Khartoum. So the information that they're giving us was the first protest was showing the focus was more on the issues of the people in Khartoum. It was a very economic focused protest about their economic issue. It wasn't so much in mass related to the issues in the fighting in South Kordofan and Blue Nile, even though a lot of the resources of the country were going to that. So as those protests took place, most of the people from the war zones like Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, Darfur were not even participating in the protest. It was more of the youth, middle-class youth, more of the ethnicities, Arab ethnicities that were involved. Now, the second protest had a bit of change. The language was different that was used. There was more inclusiveness. It wasn't perfect, but it was more inclusive of all the groups. The slogans that were being said even included things about SRF, which whether people agreed with the SRF or not, just the fact that the language was changing was very different. People would have never mentioned that in the first protest. Even after the second protest in coffee shops, our reporters were calling back to us. They would say, I was in a coffee shop, and many people are discussing what is happening in the war, and they were relating it to their issues in Khartoum. So I think that this, obviously I don't think that's in a large scale, but I think that is showing that people who are having a problem with the government inside Khartoum are now connecting the dots with other issues around Sudan. So I think as you see the next protest that will come, I think you're going to see people connecting more of those dots. So I think issues that might spark the next protest might be even this issue of Maryam, who is in jail. There was a small protest. If something actually happens with that, then I think that might spark a larger protest. Also, the election in 2015. I have a feeling that before the election or during the election day, that there'll probably be another protest around that time.
The only other thing I'd add is that there are no organizations that are very good at bringing people out on the streets in Khartoum. What the government has done very effectively over its time in power has been to weaken those professional associations that, whether lawyers or others, who could do that. And quite frankly, I don't think either of the major opposition parties in Khartoum could bring people out in the streets if they tried. So what you've got is some spontaneous demonstrations, you've got some student-led demonstrations, but you don't have the institutions, if I can call it that, who could bring out hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. And the security forces are very good at monitoring this Facebook and all of those. As one of the NIST people said earlier on in the earlier demonstrations, yes, there's a lot of people on Facebook, we have more people on Facebook. So it's not easy to put together something that's Tahrir Square kind of thing.
I'd like to add one more thing that we noticed in the last elections. As Omar mentioned, in the last elections, a lot of people were killed. This has also changed the big attitude in Khartoum. A lot of people Khartoum is very much set up like, in some ways, like a village. You have Khartoum, and the suburbs are almost like village settings, so everyone knows each other. It's very community-oriented. So when almost 200 people were shot in the last protest, many of those people were from towns all around Khartoum and within Khartoum. So a lot of people that were not necessarily, very strongly supporting the NCP, they were sitting on the fence and saw the government as being the stable entity, and that's why they would somewhat support them. But then all of a sudden, when someone's brother or their neighbor or someone within their village that they interact with every day was killed, now a lot of those people have come off that fence. They don't necessarily know who to support. They're not necessarily supporting another party, but they're definitely questioning that. And I think that's also something that you'll see some changes in the next protest as well.
I'd like to thank our panelists today and thank you all for coming out. Stay tuned for the elections next year. If they occur as scheduled, it will be the first elections that Sudan has held since the separation of Sudan and South Sudan. As Ambassador Lyman mentioned, the traditional opposition parties in the north have been very weak. And I think there's a likely front runner for an opposition candidate, whether we might see sort of the biggest challenger to President Bashir coming from within the National Congress Party or what used to be the National Islamic Front may be a possibility. But there's a lot of questions. Thank you very much.